Hey, what's up? It's Jake from Nimbus DevOps, and the last thing we're going to be going over is the generator-based context messages. And if you're implementing a class that represents some resource that needs to be acquired and released, it makes sense to implement a class as a context manager. However, sometimes you want to implement context manager behavior, but you don't have a class that it makes sense to attach that behavior to. So what does that mean? So like, let's say we use a context manager to reuse some error handling logic. In that situation, it would be kind of tedious to have to write additional class just to implement the desired context manager behavior. But Python actually has a way to do that without having to write an extra class. So the ContextLib, this module right here, it's in the standard library, and it provides a handy context manager decorator that takes a generator function and converts it into a context manager. Um, Behind the scenes, the decorator wraps the generator in a context manager object, and the enter method in the object starts the generator and returns whatever the generator yields. If an exception occurs within the with statement, the exit method passes the exception into the generator using the generator's throw method. And if it doesn't do any of that, then otherwise it'll exit and simply call next on the generator. And it's worth noting that the generator must yield once. A runtime error will be raised if the generator yields a second time. So let's look at our previous code and see if we can get this into a generator-based context manager. So the previous one I did was like this. So what I can do is instead of retyping all of this and refactoring it, I'm gonna redo it completely, and it'll be a lot different, and you'll see why. So from ContextLib, let's import the context manager. Then I can use a decorator of context manager and define a function, my context manager, and in here we will print entering with context, and then our value will just be the object, and we will print the ID of value, and then do a try yield value and accept accept exception as E, and we just want to print F, the type E equals, and just E equals, and E dot underscore underscore traceback underscore underscore equals, and that's it. This should be a bracket, not a parenthesis. There we go. Let me make sure I got this right. And this quote goes here. All right. And then let's use a finally, and we'll just print out exiting with context. And then outside of that, we will say print about to enter with context, and then say with my context manager call as value, as val, we want to print inside with context, and then we want to print the ID of val and raise exception exception inside with context, and then we will print this line will never be reached, and then outside print after with context. There you go. So the output is very similar. So if I run this Python manager, boom, you get a very, very similar output. Most context manager generators have a similar construct to the MyContextManager function in this example. They have some setup code followed by a yield statement inside of a try statement. And in this case, we yielded an arbitrary object so that you can see the same object is made available via the as clause of the with statement. And it's also quite common to have just a bare yield with no value, in which case none is yielded. In such cases, the as clause of the with statement will typically just be omitted altogether. One very useful feature of generator-based context managers is they can also be used as function decorators. This means that the entire body of a function needs to be inside a with statement context. You could save a level of indentation and just decorate with a function instead. So decorators are pretty cool, honestly. They come up a lot in here now, and it's been really nice using them. These examples are deliberately simple. They need to be simple because this is kind of complicated, and some of you are probably like, what is this guy talking about? And you're going to skip all these videos. That's fine. Originally, I created this channel to make these videos for myself to study, so I'm learning something, and that's all that matters. But study these. They're very helpful. I'm not out writing Python applications every day. That's not what I do. I do a lot of infrastructure stuff, and for me, this is way more than I would ever need to know to do my job as a DevOps engineer. But as somebody who works with developers, knowing this stuff is super helpful. And I help people debug code, and I help people refactor their code and whatnot. And um, the large majority of code that I help refactor has like zero of these types of exception thought processes. They don't go through this process. So you should be paying attention to this and using this in your code. If you're not, then you're just copying and pasting stuff from Stack Overflow, and that is not the kind of person that uh, watches my YouTube channel. Honestly, if you're the kind of person that copies and pastes stuff off Stack Overflow, then you're not learning anything. You should be figuring out how to do it. The whole point of this is to learn it from the inside out and understand how this works. You may never do any of this, but you now know way more about tracebacks and exceptions than the average person, which is great. And if that's all that ever happens, then that's great. Um, so yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now. Um, so that's it for exceptions and context managers. If you have any questions, let me know. And if not, then we're going to finally get into some cool stuff where we take all these concepts and theory and whatnot and start messing with files and data persistence, which is what everybody's always wanted to do. So good luck, have fun, and happy coding.